am in an Airbnb in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, here for PAX Unplugged. I was sitting in the room in the apartment. It's a studio, really. And I was bumping around YouTube on the TV and I ran across a video I hadn't seen before. I don't even recall the creator's name, but the video itself had at least a couple of thousand plays, if I'm recalling correctly. And basically, it was his take that rules light games will always fail. Now, coming from the kind of OSR and adjacent spaces that I do, that immediately piqued my interest because, well, it seems rather off. But I was curious as to why they felt that way. So I watched the video, or at least most of the video. And his take, I think, is completely off base. And this is not even with getting into the successes of Kickstarters like Dolmenwood, but just in general, he seemed to be judging his argument based on scrolling through videos on YouTube. I don't even think he was watching, just scrolling through. It seemed like his logic boiled down to that because Pathfinder and D&D inspire so much out of game thought, and in his mind small rules light games, and he specifically called out Old School Essentials as one. I think Mork Borg was another one, and then he had Dungeon World. Those were his three rules light examples. So certainly at least Old School Essentials, you're pointing right into the OSR space, right? So saying, hey, look, D&D and Pathfinder, he put those kind of up on a pedestal. Those two games inspire lots of out-of-game chatter, whereas OSR are really rules-like games, but he's kind of calling out OSR games or OSR/NSR, whatever. But you have Dungeon World, which is powered by the Apocalypse game, also rules-light, but then Morkborg, and which I would at least put as OSR adjacent, and Old School Essential. So 2 out of the 3 kind of OSR games. He says those don't inspire outside of game talk. And of course, coming from the OSR space, you're in that space like I am, you'd probably go, huh? There's what? There's no talk between games? We have nothing to talk about? My channel, I got nothing to talk about. Other channels that cover OSR topics have nothing to talk about. He said that, well, you look on YouTube and all you get are actual plays, and he said something else. Something in actual plays. Or maybe it was Kickstarter reviews and actual plays. And I guess, I'm a really small channel, so maybe my videos don't get to the front page. I'm not sure what his search terms are, but clearly there are lots of content creators that are putting out talk on a daily basis about OSR topics. Certainly, if you go to the different subreddits and different discords that are out there, there is endless amounts of discussion 24/7 about different topics. So I don't know where that came from, but the one thing he said, well, there were 2 things he said that were interesting. One of which seems to me almost a suggestion that the fact that in some ways the flaws of D&D and Pathfinder help it, because he talked about that because those games are flawed or difficult or complex, some combination of the above, that content creators can come in and fill in the gaps, and that this creates a lot of the content that basically holds folks over from one game to the next. You may only play Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, some other game, once a week, but because of all these complexities within the game, all these inefficiencies in the game, all the customization in the game, there's all kinds of content being created for it. And therefore, in a sense, there's water cooler talk that will hold you over, that will keep you engaged in the game from your session one week to your session the next week. Well, I guess he's kind of saying that, or he seemed to be saying that your rules light games don't have as much of that. They don't have builds necessarily. They don't have a lot of those complexities and inefficiencies. Certainly, that's all true. So therefore, we've got nothing to talk about between games, and therefore our games our games or these systems are sort of doomed to be relegated to the shadow of D&D and Pathfinder. I guess I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean. Clearly, we're all talking about stuff. He did mention that well, DM advice is universal. Yes and no. I think a lot of the advice on my channel is universal, but it's also clear that people do not play Pathfinder and D&D the way I play, say, BX/Old School Essentials, the way folks play Morkborg, certainly not the way folks play Dungeon World. So while a lot of topics are indeed universal, their applications are often different, and as you get into the details, also very different. Not that you can't adapt them and use them, but oftentimes I think a DM, a dungeon master for 5th edition, might not be interested in the way I run things for uh, a BX based game. And certainly I am not interested in what a lot of Dungeon Master advice is that's geared towards 5th edition because it simply doesn't apply to me. So there was that. But there was another topic he pointed out, which was interesting to me. And it's probably going to come across a little bit dated now in light of the Kickstarter success of Dolmenwood. But he talked about lore. And he said that, Pathfinder setting, and I forget the name, has an immense amount of lore, and lots of people are constantly talking about that lore and creating content around that lore. And Pathfinder updates their lore and puts out new material on their lore. D&D has Faerun, and they do the same thing. All the different campaigns push forward a timeline of Faerun. There's a deep lore around Faerun, and then a lot of the rules light games don't have that, or they really don't have that much. And that's an interesting point. Now, obviously, people are going to say, but Todd, Dolmenwood, which is a setting, it just did, $1 million and is over the moon on Kickstarter, and it's going to do all that. And that's true. But that's a new phenomenon. And I think this video was a few months old, so pre Dolmenwood Kickstarter. And even if you want to say, well, there's Dolmenwood, hard to argue that there's a lot of other ones. And I think that this is an interesting space. Maybe it does in a way. I think a lot of his conclusions are not really well thought out, and his reasoning, I think, is not that well thought out. But maybe there's a gem in there, in that maybe we should do more with settings, or really sustaining settings in the OSR space. Maybe that would help galvanize folks. Now, I know there's lots of micro settings or mini settings, but there isn't, I don't think, in the mainstream. I know people will come and say, oh, there's this, oh, there's that, oh, there's this other thing. But in terms of the big players in the OSR space, I don't know that I could say off the top of my head what are their settings, the way I can just say Faerun for D&D, or whatever it is for Pathfinder, or Exandria for the Critical Role kind of universe. Maybe it would be good to do that. Dolmenwood seems to kind of be one. I guess Bastionland and its variants would probably be another one. There are probably more, but maybe we're going to be getting to a point in which that'll be the next frontier. We'll be building out how, hopefully Dolmenwood will be something that not just in this Kickstarter, but it will become that kind of living setting that will be continually updated and evolved over time. And it seems like that will be the case with Bastionland, as well as they explore different angles there. But it seemed to be that maybe that is something that we could look to fill. And I know for myself that that's something I often am frustrated by in the OSR space. Is people will come in and they'll throw out a project which looks really good, but then they're off to do something completely different. Now, I get it, and I'm not trying to say that's wrong or bad, but for me, I lament the fact that I often feel like I wish that more investment over time in some of these things that are being put out there, instead of spraying a whole bunch of stuff. I'd love more products to go deep instead of going wide and trying to cover all the bases. So maybe that is something to think about if you're a content creator out there and you're wondering, what can I do in the OSR space? Maybe really focusing and being concentrated on a setting will work. Now, of course, this whole video is kind of silly because comparing Paizo and Wizards of the Coast / Hasbro to the kind of small creators, even somebody like Free League, who, sure, they have lots of licensed products now, and in terms of other creators, they're big, but they're not Hasbro. Maybe they're Paizo sized. I don't know where Paizo sits, how big of a corporation they are, how deep their pockets are, but comparing the kind of folks that are in the OSR space, comparing Dungeon World to a mass market mega corporation product, it's a bit silly, even before you get into the other kind of things that I just didn't feel like were well-founded arguments. But I did see that little gem, and since I got nothing else better to do, is I'm really just waiting for tomorrow to come. I thought I would share that with you. Let me know what you think if you saw that video or have seen similar videos. I'm always fascinated in what the view is of the OSR and Rules Light or NSR, whatever stuff, kind of from outside the field. And certainly in terms of what this person saw from what little delving they did in Facebook is valid, just in terms of, well, that's what they saw. And the fact that they couldn't find more, I don't know if it's down to, well, they just didn't do their research and they just didn't go down to the next page of results, or go whatever. But I think it might be telling if someone looks at the surface and they see these things that I think lead them to wrong conclusions about our corner of the hobby. that might be another angle to look at. I'll have to delve more in there, but you let me know what you think. I'm going to try to get some sleep and head out to PAX on the morn. So, game on, everybody. Talk to you later.